back, but
I get it for me.
yeah.
I mean, that's a, she's good. I'm just terrible.
But it was all the way on the other
Take my
side.
butt twice. Can't because he's recording.
Maybe those two fit together.
So who's the undisputed best?
Bill had his record. Yeah, I have it.
So he has to play Jim White.
Jim good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when
Jim's
Jim's
like
got like
world class.
half stride and he's got his arm to the
This is true.
Yeah, Jim doesn't have to
Jim
move.
can just like,
That's
yeah.
and then he admits it. That's what.
Oh, it doesn't hurt.
No.
That's
like
hard
Steve.
racquetball.
The reach.
The reach.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be amused, watch Richard play, Jim.
That's true.
Well, I'm gonna for the rest of this 2-hour session, I'm just going to tackle fairly random thoughts on the problem of creating and selecting a good idea for game design, negative rules, positive rules, whatever. I'm just going to sort of dig down the bottom of the barrel and scrape up last tidbits on this. I was in the middle of talking about the negative rule, don't design a game from a technical trick, and I wanted to give the example of Dragon's Lair as a very good example of a technical trick, of trying to build a game around a technical trick. If you look at that game, it isn't a game. They took a really neat piece of technology, video disc, and then they just sort of said, let's stick a game on top of it, and the end result was wretched. Now, the end result sold a zillion copies because of its bad value. And you can get away with using a technical trick to sell a lot of units if you're the first kid on the block. But if there's somebody else who gets there 3 weeks before you, you've lost it. So you're taking a big chance when you play that game. Your rewards can be big, but I personally feel, you know, why not go for the sure thing? Make a good game. It'll sell for sure. So don't try to build a game around a technical trick that is just too risky. Oh yes, I recall. I was also talking about two styles of creativity: technology-driven creativity and needs-driven creativity. Where technology-driven creativity is the type of creativity you use when you start with the technology and you ask, what can I do with this that's interesting? And the difficulty is you end up making little more than a demo for the technology. The better style of creativity, with its own catches built into it, is needs-driven creativity. The idea here is you look out at the world and you say, well, what do people need, or what am I trying to accomplish, and you work backwards from that and figure out how can I use technology to satisfy that need. In game design, you say, how can I entertain people with technology? Okay, that seems trivially obvious, that needs-driven creativity is the way to do it. Unfortunately, it isn't quite that simple. There is a bit of technological expertise required here, not merely in answering the question, how can I use technology, but in anticipating the future directions of technology. That is, it's not good enough to simply say, here is the technology available today. There is also an element of anticipation. How is technology evolving? How can I position myself in such a way that is to take advantage of this future evolution of technology? For example, I was discussing this last night. Right now, the IBM PC is the top home games machine. Really, factor 2. It is the best machine to design for in terms of sales volume. Should we all abandon whatever machines we're working on, put a clothespin on our nose and work on PCs? No, because PC won't last forever. If you make that commitment right now, you give yourself, say, 3 months to learn the PC, assuming you don't already know it, and then you give yourself a year to do a game. That means it comes out in mid-1989, and it reaches the peak of its sales power at Christmas of '89. Will the PC still be the #1 machine then? Well, probably so. But what about your second project and your third project? How long is it going to be the dominant machine? I don't know. the point is, for me, that would be a bad idea because I'm on the Macintosh. And the Macintosh, I feel, represents sort of a generation after the PC. So I'm not going to go backwards to the PC, rush to get some stuff out on PC, and then return to the Macintosh. That's my personal style is I really don't want to waste time learning hardware. I've learned a new machine, the Macintosh, and I think I'll stick with the damn thing through its life cycle. It is useful to anticipate where technology is going, what you expect to be the next great wave machine. You can lose a lot of money on this. One of the fundamental decisions we all had to make concerned the Amiga. We all looked at the Amiga, we all said, this is the machine I want to design on. And then different ones of us compromised. We had to compromise our desire for doing great games against our desire to make some money. I looked at the Amiga and I just told myself this machine won't sell as well. I looked at the Macintosh and said this machine will. The Macintosh isn't as good as the Amiga, but it's a lot neater than an IBM PC. So every man has his price, and my price was such that I'm crass enough not to use the Amiga, but noble enough not to use the IBM PC. So you set your own price. Anyway, so let's see, what else here? So these two styles of creativity, actually what you end up doing is sort of a mix of the two, only I'm not going to be so mushmouth as to say, well, you need technical creativity and you need need-driven creativity and just sort of mishmash them together. Need-driven creativity takes primacy, always. That is, you always start from what the customer wants, what the customer will like, and work backwards from that, always. But if you are technically ignorant, if you don't have a feeling for what the technology can do, more important, what the technology will be able to do, then your creativity is always going to be off the mark, which is why the pure marketing people who try to come up with great game ideas are always off the mark. They don't understand the technology, and why there are too many engineers who are too close to the hardware, who don't get out and play games, who don't know what the customers want, who do equally bad work. So you need both. The primacy has to go to the marketing side, what the user wants, but you got to have the. But both are still necessary. A question? No. Oh, okay. I'm going to digress for a minute on an issue of logic that I feel is frequently confused. The difference between necessity and primacy. I see this all the time, people talking about a game, because they say, well, this is a necessary condition, therefore we must give it equal treatment with that. This is a long story, this is a pretty good one. I once read a historical analysis of an American offensive in World War II in southern Italy. Historian wanted to know who was actually doing the fighting, because in the standard history books it says 105,000 Americans were involved in the final push in the Battle of Monte Sereno or something like that. And he thought, gosh, 105,000 people, they must have done a lot of shooting. Wait a minute, who actually did the fighting? So he delved into the Army records, and he tried to account for every, not individual, but every group of people and say, well, 50 people were doing this and 400 people were doing that. What he found was that 105,000 number, that included stevedores back on the docks in Naples unloading ammo off ships, truck drivers driving it up to the front, engineers bulldozing roads for the trucks, bakers making food for everybody, headquarters personnel managing all of this, military police directing all this and maintaining order, an awful lot of people in the rear. The American Army has always had a large logistic tail, it's called. On the actual battlefield even, of the combat units, an awful lot of the people were runners, guys who carry the ammo up to the cannons because you can't bring the truck up that close. Guys who dug trenches and took away body registration, it's called. Medical people, all of these other people, even in the combat divisions. Of the actual battle itself, there were 3 battalions involved. The battalion typically has about 1,000 men. However, 2 of the battalions were really flanking battalions, and their combat objections were to demonstrate. That is, what they did when the big attack came was, they shot a lot of guns at the enemy, and they kind of made a lot of noise and just tried to confuse the enemy as to where the real attack was coming. They pretty much just stood back and blasted away without ever accomplishing anything. There's only 1 battalion whose objective was to actually capture ground. And in that battalion is composed of 3 companies. One of the companies was held in reserve. One of the companies had a secondary objective that was not really terribly important. And the 3rd company was the one that did the real fighting. And that company was under strength. It had about 120 men. And so this entire battle, with 150,000 or 105,000 men, boiled down to 120 poor bloody bastards who had to jump out of their holes, run through fire and death, and chase about 120 poor German bastards out of their holes. Now, the point this historian made after this huge analysis was, he referred to this as the tip of his spear. He said, look, all these other people were necessary. That battle could not have been fought and won if it weren't for the stevedores back at the docks and the bakers and the MPs and the administration people and doctors and tractor drivers and truck drivers. All those people were necessary. It couldn't have happened without them. But it was the guys who actually did the fighting who really won it. They were more necessary. It's the difference between doing a simple Boolean computation, saying, well, in order to win the battle, you've got to have the stevedores and the truck drivers and the MPs and the headquarters personnel and them. It's easy to look at that Boolean thing and say, well, they're all equally important. They're not. The guys who did the fighting were more important than all of the other people. The same thing goes in a lot of issues in game design. Yes, you have to have good graphics. You have to have good sound. You have to run without having any bugs. You know, these things are all absolute essentials. But there remains that most important consideration: you've got to have good gameplay. In the area of creativity, this is a digressive comment. In the area of creativity, I want to point out, yes, you have to have the appreciation for what the user wants, and yes, you've got to have the technical expertise, but don't rank them equally. What's more important is the experience delivered to the user. That marketing side of it, if you want to use the dirty word, that must have primacy. The technical considerations are still essential, but essential is not the same thing as equal. Make sure you don't make that fallacy, because I encounter that fallacy in people's thinking time and time again in this business. Let's see. That was a sermon. That wasn't. Anyway. Okay, let me just characterize games. An important point, something a lot of people try to do is come up with snazzy little rules. Trip Hawkins called, a great game is hot, deep, and simple. One of the classic Atari rules for arcade games was, it must be, this is Nolan Bushnell's rule, simple to learn, difficult to master. In fact, I think it was easy to learn, impossible to master, or something like that. Everybody likes these little catchy rules. In the movie industry, they got a lot of them. They really love these little catchy things. One of the things they talk about is high concept. And what they mean by that is pretty ambiguous. I've tried to find that out, but apparently what they're driving at is the notion that you can summarize the entire movie in one sentence. And that actually is a pretty good general rule in game design. A really good game, you should be able to summarize it in a short statement that really expresses what the game is all about. Let me just go through some good games and bad games and attempt to give you summaries of them in the hope, I haven't planned this, I'm hoping that good games you can just summarize instantly and bad games you can't. So let's see what happens. I'll do my own because I'm familiar with them. Balance of power. Run the world, geopolitical conflict with Ruskies. I think that summarizes the game pretty well. And that sounds fun too. Eastern Front. Outmaneuver the Boy, I don't like Ruskies too. Outmaneuver the Ruskies. Trap, surround, and destroy them. That pretty well summarizes Eastern Front. Let's see. Sea Boot. The initial concept, if I want to express it in a single verb phrase, is talk to the animals. That was the central design concept behind Sea Boot. The game itself is a bit sloppier than that. It's talk with characters, interact with them emotionally, decide whom to betray and whom to trust. That's a little sloppier, and it shows up in the game. Let's see. We're down to 2 chocolate chip cookies, guys.
Looks like even the brownies weren't as popular. I took all the chocolate chip cookies they had.
Yes,
I
you did.
would have bought more.
You should have seen the lady's eyes when she said, "I want all your chocolate chip cookies now."
Good. A little too much frosting. Big one.
Well, this is a healthy brownie, let's say.
Let's see, some other, a couple of game proposals I'm working on. One of the proposals I'm working on can be very easily summarized in the phrase, economic toy train set. That really captures the idea of the game. Can you visualize a game from that phrase? Does that phrase evoke a game for you? Well, let me explain what I'm driving at, and then you tell me how well the phrase works. The idea is there's going to be this big economy, and you're going to be running and saying, "Oh, steel production down 12%. We better build a new steel factory over there. And hey, steel production is outrunning our coal supply. We better dig a new coal mine. And hey, we've got to move the coal from this area over here. Build a new train line. And our fleet of freighters isn't big enough. Build more freighters. We don't have enough capital for the freighters, huh? Well, we'll cut down, we'll sell more of our steel abroad and use that capital to build more freighters." Sort of running this economy, but you're actually seeing the thing run on the screen. Does that phrase, economic toy train set, capture that concept? What I'm driving at is really the fun. Pardon?
I don't think so.
Let's.
Economic trains are distracting.
Okay, let me tell you what I'm driving at, because it could be that my design doesn't meet my central notion. My central notion, you know, the fun of a toy train set of, oh wow, look at here, I'll send the trains over there and do this crossover here so the train moves onto the other track and choo choo, here I am running all these trains. There's this sense of control and power from running this big complex system, feeling like you're at the controls with these levers making things happen. That's the fun that I want to get in this game, only it's going to be with economics rather than toy trains.
Well, we call it balance of power with economics.
Yeah. Balance of power you might call geopolitical toy train set. So,
But that doesn't describe it. I mean, that's an analogy for
It's
it.
an okay
It's too many
analogy.
connotations
There's too many
to qualify.
connotations with
Yes.
that in other contexts.
Actually, I have to
which
admit
is what
that-
it gives rise to other images rather than what you're...
But I thought when I read it was that, this was something that was easily affordable. A toy train set that anybody could own.
an economical
Yeah.
toy train set.
I see. And the other problem is, I don't know if anybody ever got their toy train set ever done enough to ever run it. I mean,
Yeah,
the
it's
fun
always
of building a toy set is
expanding,
like when it's
not getting it
upside
done.
down, you're wiring it. I mean,
Yeah.
the building of the toy set.
Once it's done and it goes around once, now what do I do?
Yeah, really. That's, I
buy
never had
more
a switch,
stuff.
it just went around.
Well, what do I do now? Time to put on a mouse.
Well,
on this other track. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Toy train
I
sets
think
are
the
never
analogy
complete,
of it
though.
was just
I mean, you always
more
gotta buy
misleading than
more
it was helpful.
stuff, more switches, more houses, more people, more.
Which
Try to run
actually
into
cheats
the
that
basics.
analogy.
Try to run into the
Never ends.
poor Chris, I guess
You
you
still
just
think
don't
you
have
give
the
him a
right
lot of
phrase.
No, but maybe this means I've got a bad game here.
No, you just,
no,
this
no.
toy train. You can still sum it up in one sentence, but that's not the right one.
Okay, okay.
There you go.
Let's see. Can anybody summarize Three Stooges in a sentence?
Come on.
Interactive movie. I mean, that's what they try to do. Oh yeah, it works. Oh yeah, no problem.
Very good.
Stooges collect money through a series of arcade events.
Yeah, join the
That's a
Stooges.
description.
to
not
say-
a-
Well,
not a
wait,
summary.
Join the
That's a
Stooges
catalog.
as they
Join the Stooges as they travel down the
He wants to
game
save
of life, attempting to earn money
Yeah.
to save the orphanage
Yeah.
for Graham.
Help the Stooges.
Good
Graham.
versus evil.
Help Stooges save the orphanage for money.
Watch the evil bankers show up
Yeah,
on
that's right.
squares on the street.
Can't wait. What's on the box? Can Three Stooges
Oh.
save?
No, the
Yeah.
evil banker. He took their nest egg and told them to feed it.
Yeah.
Thrill as pies.
Lonnie liked it.
See, let me just find
Will
the
they get
best.
tossed out on their arrears?
The best
Yeah.
description I heard was help the Three Stooges as they try to save Mom or whatever. Notice the verb, help. That's a real weak verb. Have you ever been in an English class where the English teacher rants and raves, I want powerful verbs, I want verbs with impact. You don't help somebody, you,
Facilitate aid.
no, you want active verbs here. Conquer things.
Conquer the evil
Transform
banker.
Yeah.
Conquer the evil raw oyster.
Good. Good writing always. Good writers always sweat over these verbs with big impact. And in game design, there's something vaguely similar. What is the player doing? Is he doing neat, active, interactive things? Anyway.
Click on the square of your choice.
Yeah. Fool's errand. Let's see. Okay, well, let's see. I think I've exhausted some of these random types. Oh, yes. Here's another one. The role of the user interface. Now, I'm way out on a limb with this claim, but I think that you should design the user interface after you have the basic structure down. That is, the first thing you do is you define the interaction. So this is what the player's going to do. Then you figure out how he's going to see it on the screen and what he's going to say back to the computer. I still believe that, but the problem is that that is vitally important because that's what the user sees. And if that's no good, you don't got a game. Even if you, my greatest weakness as a designer is, I tend to build machines with beautiful sets of gears and levers and pulleys, and a Chris Crawford game, you can just hear all the wheels going, and so forth. Lots of process intensity, lots of computations going on. But what the user sees is always much blander. It's rather like, imagine, this is a rather unhumble analogy, but imagine talking to Albert Einstein on downers, and you get an idea of what playing one of my games is like. Here he is slurring his words.
I can't imagine talking to Albert Einstein normally.
No, he's on downers. So here's Einstein sitting here saying, fourth dimension, yes. And you know that there's stuff inside there, but Jesus, coming out so slow and boring. And that has been always my greatest flaw as a designer. And so when I give you this great precept, design the user interface, after you get the internal structure right, I have to caution you that that is one of the causative elements in my greatest weakness as a designer. So the last thing I want you to do is learn what I do wrong Nevertheless, I'm going to stick to my principles, my theory above all, even if it produces bad games. I feel the user interface has to follow the design, because if you do it the other way, there are actually three choices. Leads, goes at the same time, or follows. If you lead, that is, if you say, let's design a user interface and then figure out a game to fit it, that's obviously absurd. I have seen people who do that, and it produces some really silly results. And then if you have the thing, well, let's do it all at once, sort of design the two in parallel, then you end up with mishmash. It's very difficult to, to set priorities and say, first this leads us to conclude that, which suggests this, and so forth. You don't have any way of logically proceeding through the design. So maybe I'm insisting too much on a logical process in design. Maybe the user interface is just part of the wild, creative thing.
If I may leap your defense for a change, there's every reason in the world to put off designing the interface until you really work out, what you're interfacing with. I mean, because a computer game is so malleable. I mean, God knows there's so many different ways and states that it can have. I don't think you really can do a good job just designing the interface until you know precisely what it is that the user is going to be talking to. I mean, the user's pretty well set, what hands are and eyes are and all that, but until you've invented it, you don't know what is coming out of that computer. So,
okay.
I think it makes perfect sense the way.
Best, it has to be an iterative process, right? I mean, you've got to.
Yeah.
This is what your interaction is going to be. Okay, now this is how I can represent that with the user interface. I can't quite do everything, so we'll have to modify this.
Yes.
And come back.
Yes.
Compromise.
The trick is, let's make it one of those. What are those series in mathematics? One of those series where it drops down. That is, first we're going to do A, and then we're going to do B, and then we're going to come back and modify A a little bit because of B, and then we're going to come back to B, and so forth. So, yes, it's iterative, but there's still a sense of priority. And in fact, I really did that with C-Boot because I had so many difficulties with the game design. The language mirrors reality, and in C-Boot I invented this alien language that you use to speak with people. And so the language I used was an intrinsic part of the game structure. What you said what you say dictates or is dictated by what is allowed to happen in the game. So as I went through the game, I would say, well, this is the reality I want to get, and then I would find there's no good sentence structure I can use to reflect that, so I'll have to go back to the internal structure and change the reality that I will allow somewhat. And so I was going back and forth between user interface and internal structure. So yeah, this process does happen. The iterations do take place. We can't avoid the fact it's really tough. There are a lot of constraints on user interface. A lot of times we can't do it the way we want. We've got to go back, meddle with the internal structure so we can get a structure that fits what the user interface we can do. Let me now turn to the extremely sensitive and difficult subject of cosmetics in graphics and sound. Graphics and sound fill two roles. There is a functional role of communication. That is, graphics and sound as part of the user interface help communicate game information to the player so the player knows what the hell is going on in the game. They also fill an affective role. They help the player feel things. This role I use the pejorative term of cosmetics for. And that term does denigrate that kind of use of graphics and sound. Nevertheless, I argue strongly for primacy of functional graphics and sound. I do not argue against the inclusion of cosmetic graphics and sound. That is what I'm saying. When you lay out the graphics and sound, when you're planning it, first and foremost, make sure you're communicating clearly and well. make sure the graphics and sound show the player, make the player know what's really happening, quickly, intuitively, deeply. Show him what you're talking about. Make sure he understands exactly what the game situation is. Functionality must have primacy. Once you've got functionality, then cosmetics is icing on the cake. If you can do it with flair, if you can toss in a little flourish, great, that's fine. It doesn't hurt. Unfortunately, what I will argue against is people putting all icing and no cake into a game. They work on the icing first because it's fun. I will name a name here. I once had an employee named Eric Wilmonder. This guy represents so beautifully what I find wrong in so many game designers. Most of them have been pushed out of the business now. Eric was a graphics person, not a game designer, only he thought he was a game designer. His greatest joy in life was making neat graphics, and he was very, very good at it. His whole style was to sit in front of the computer. He was the hacking mentality carried, to extremes. He sat in front of there, he looked at it, he hit that interrupt key, and went right back to the editor. Make another quick change. Okay, assemble that. Let's see what it looks like. Sees it on the screen. He likes that real fast turnaround time. Huh? That looks a little better. Let's make that hand a little bit more like this. Cut it off. Make another little change. Just very intense. And he'd sit there for hours in this lots and lots of iterations. He'd see a little thing, make a little tiny visual change, and do it again. And he'd go over and over and over and over and over again. And slowly that image would get better. His animations were beautiful. His graphics were beautiful. He did something, a project for me. I hired him into corporate research to implement a project called Gossip. This was a research game. It was never meant to be a commercial product. It was just an interesting idea I had. It was my very first attempt at an interpersonal relations game. Let me contrast two completely different styles. I came up with this idea for a game. I was thinking, how do people interact? How do interpersonal relations go? What's a nice little kernel of that idea? How can I really get a synopsis of interpersonal interactions? And then I came up with this really neat idea. I would model it based on behavior in a tightly bound crystal, behavior of molecules in a tightly bound crystal from solid-state physics. And although actually what I ended up with was deviated from that. The idea I said was, if you got a group of people here, basically they have affinities for each other that are like springs. And every pair has an affinity. And so, whatever. So every pairing has some sort of an affinity that's like a spring. And so, if this person suddenly, let's say this is an equilibrium state. They're all about where they are. Now let's say these two people fall in love. What's going to happen? Or let me give a better example. Long distance, by the way, implies hatred. And closeness implies love. Let's say now that, these two people fall in love and they move much closer to each other. Well, the problem is that's going to stretch all the other springs. In other words, if for right here, this person really hates this person. If this person moves closer over here, now you've got tension. Because this guy sort of likes this one, but really hates that one. And yet they're real close to each other. Have you ever been in a situation where there was a couple and you really liked one of them and the other was an obnoxious person you didn't like? And how do you deal with that? And so basically what happens is this person will actually move a little bit further away from this one as a result of that. So, and then basically it's just from there you can see it's a mathematical model from here. People like people who like people they like. People hate people who like people they hate. And people hate people who hate people they like. That's a Boolean way of expressing the same concepts. Anyway, so I thought about this model, So I started off with a basic model and concept and said, wow, that's a neat idea, and it does express something about reality. And you can interact with that, because if you're a person in here, by positioning yourself relative to a third, if I want to convince this person to like me, I can change my position relative to other people, and that will change how he feels about me. Now that's an interesting interaction. Very simple, but interesting. This was my very first cut at an interpersonal relationships game. So the way I sat down and tackled this problem was, I said, let's experiment with it. I sat down, and in 3 hours I hacked together something in BASIC that ran this model. And all it did was it printed out on the printer the matrix of people's feelings for each other, just a number from 1 to 10. And then I just rigged up something that allowed you to declare your feelings for any person as a number between 1 and 10, and then it would recalculate the matrix. And then I called my wife in. I said, what do you think of this? And I explained the rules to her in 5 minutes. And then I just said, and it'll stop and ask you, what do you want to say about about Joe? And you just type in a number between 1 and 10, and then it goes away, computes for about a minute, and the printer goes blah, 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 and so forth. She started playing that game. My wife hates all my games. She just won't play any of them. The worst thing about it, digressive note, she loves card solitaire games on the computer. The other day, I went into a computer store and I bought her Solitaire Royale from Spectrum Holobyte. And I felt like, I wonder how Mozart would have felt buying Turkey in the Hay for his wife. Okay, but Shanghai's pretty good. Yeah, Shanghai's good.
That's what my wife plays.
Okay, yeah, she loves Shanghai too. And I don't mind that. I do mind the fact that she prefers Solitaire Royale over my stuff. Anyway. So she's never liked my games. I brought her in, I had her look at this game, and she said, wow, this is really neat. She started playing it and playing it. She, Kathy, kind of liked to work on it some more. No. I couldn't get back on my computer because she really liked it. God, I've done it. This was 1982 or 83, I think. 82. My God, I've done it. I found, this was the Holy Grail, the game that women like. This was big. Do you guys remember this? Back in those years, what can we get that women will play?
50% of the market's untapped.
Yeah, all those lines. I thought, this is it. I've done it. You know, visions of fabulous wealth and fame and glory and so forth. I really thought I had it here. Anyway, so I decided, well, let's just develop this game as a concept, because there were still a lot of, this is really simplistic, and I thought there were a lot of flaws. So I hired Eric Wilmunder. Said, go to work on it now. Talk about difference in style. I hacked my thing together in 3 hours in BASIC, and really what I was concentrating on was some very complicated mathematical equations for relaxation of this system. He went to work on it. I said, Eric, here's a complete function. I worked another few days and cleaned up the basic code and commented it and made it neat and nice and so forth. Handed it over to him and said, Eric, I want you to do 2 things. 1, recode all this in assembly language so it'll run fast because it's terribly slow in BASIC. And 2, I want you to put a graphics front end on it so it doesn't give you numbers. You know, let's have some people there talking to each other, saying things. We ended up with this really cute game. And the basic idea was you see 8 people on the screen, and each one has a phone in front of them. The idea of the game is there's this prom coming up, and you want your, depending on whatever sex you are, you get to choose your sex. There was an option button. This was great. You push the option key, and here's you, and you're male right now, which means you are bald. And if you push the option key, you get a wig. You're female now.
As we know, all real men.
So anyway, so you played this game. The idea was to get all the people of the other sex to invite you to prom. Get them like you. So
Baldness and the cats. I think you guys are really fed for each other.
Okay. Let's see.
What does the game do?
Yeah, so there are all these people on the telephone, and you call up somebody and you gossip about them. You say, I really hate Tom, I really like Mary, and so forth, and by posturing in this way, you get them to like you. Really simple game. Eric did this game. He did a beautiful job with the graphics. I mean, people, looked beautiful. They were done with lots of colors. Very clever use of graphics. They would pick up the telephone. I had another guy, a sound consultant, make me a arrow sound, and that came out great. And the phone, so the game would start, and the phone would go ring. It sounded just like a telephone, and you pick up the phone, arrow, and then the other
Larry
sound.
Garner by any chance?
Of course, all of Larry's sounds sound like Harold.
And the other thing we had was a rutabaga sound, which is sort of the random sound of people talking, and so there was a sound effect of everything around. And it was terribly cute, and Eric did a glorious job on the graphics. My main point after all of this long war story is the fact that that was all Eric ever did, just the graphics. He got the graphics up and running beautifully in 6 weeks flat. I was beside myself. Wow, I've got a hot shot here. This guy got this game up and running, ready to go in 6 weeks. I'd hired him for the summer. He was still an undergraduate. And he said, well, I don't have the algorithms in yet. I said, no problem. I mean, that's just, I had written some macros already that translated simple, basic type formulas into stuff. So just put that stuff in there, get it running. You're set. That's maybe a week's work most. And then he said, okay, great. Well, he put it off and went to do more graphics. Basically, he just couldn't understand algorithms. This guy couldn't understand multiplication. It was beyond his mental capacity. If he could see it on the screen, it was great. If it involved writing an equation down on paper, count me out. He put it off for about 3 weeks. Finally, I said, begin work now. Screw that neat graphic stuff. The graphics is great right now. Do the algorithms. 4 weeks passed, he still didn't have it working. It was time for him to go back to school. He didn't want to go back to school. He wanted a full-time job with me. He said if he only had another month, he could get the whole game finished. I counseled him to go back to school, but he was determined. He wanted to do game design. We talked about it a lot. I said, okay, you can stay, finish the game, because I wanted the game finished. And 4 months later, I took him off the project. He never got the arithmetic working. It was total trash. A few weeks after that, I turned the project over to another person, a lady who was very good at algorithms. And after looking over his code for about a week, she threw away all of the algorithm code. She said it was utter trash. The guy simply couldn't understand any kind of algorithm. This is an extreme. You don't want to fall into this. This is the wrong way to do it, because this is cosmetics to the exclusion of everything else. Bad news is Eric is now very happy at Lucasfilm, and Lucasfilm is the ideal place for a guy like Eric. Unfortunately, Lucasfilm games, I mean, are you familiar with any of the games? Rescue on Fractalus, Ball Blazer, Pigeon Pegasus, all of their games are pure graphics games. Basically what they do, their editorial philosophy as a company is, we're going to design a neat graphics effect. For example, did you know that the title, Rescue on Fractalus, I think that's the way it's spelled. Does that suggest anything to you? Their whole approach is, let's do a neat graphic effect and then build a game into it. And that's what Rescue on Fractalus is. They said, let's do a computer game that has fractals in it. So they built this computer game that has this neat fractal generating thing that runs real fast. Gosh, you get these beautiful scenes of mountains. Wow! That's all. The basic gameplay is real dumb. They don't design games. They do graphics and try to turn them into games. And the only reason why that development house is in existence is because they got a real rich sugar daddy. George Lucas thinks that games are neat, and he doesn't care that his development group loses money. He just, hey, we got money to waste. Someday George Lucas will run out of money, and all those guys will be in the unemployment line next door. Maybe you can pick up a few of them. Anyway, that is the wrong way to do it. Graphics and sound are first and foremost ways of communicating information to people. First, communicating the cognitive stuff, and second, communicating affective information, i.e. doing the cosmetic things, setting the mood, making people feel good when they win because nice bright primary colors flash on the screen, and bad when they lose because dark, dank colors show up on the screen. Whatever. But make sure that you have your priorities in order. Make sure that you communicate clearly first, then put the icing on the cake. So, let's see. Last item, let's see. Yeah, I got just a little while left before lunch break here. Last item I want to talk about is writing the proposal. Okay, you've gone through all the creative agony. You've rolled around on the floor, taken walks among trees and pretty birds. You've done all these great Chris Crawford things. Oh boy, you feel good. You've got your idea, you've worked out the interaction and shown that it's process intensive, and all of that. Now it comes time to write a proposal. Why do you write a proposal? Two reasons. The real reason is to clarify your thinking. The real reason you write the proposal is for your own good. The secondary reason is so that you can convince some poor sucker to give you money for this. Both are awfully important, but I think primacy must go to the clarification process. I once had a crusty old English teacher who's, one of these. You have all of your education, you have a few teachers who said something so, it struck you so hard, you've always remembered it. Well, one of those things for me was the English teacher who nailed me to the wall once. I had written something pretty dumb, pretty sloppy in an essay I turned in, and the English teacher was so mad about it. He stood up in front of the class and he read my essay to the class, and then he came to the punchline, this blooper of a sentence that that was ambiguous and could either mean something terribly stupid or terribly profound, and it sounded like a terribly stupid thing. And he got up there and he read that, and then he read off my sentence, and the whole class howled with laughter. And if I'd had any brains at all, I would have laughed too, because he didn't say who wrote it. I'd go, ha ha, what a dummy. Well, I was a teenager back then, and so I didn't laugh. I just turned red and started sputtering, and I said, but, that wasn't what I meant to say. I knew what I was trying to say. And right then, with the laughter slowly dying down, the teacher turned to me, and he was laughing, and suddenly the laugh just went right off his face, and there was this really fierce scowl. And he said, if you can't say it, you don't know it. And that was one of those moments in life where something just reaches right into you and changes you. And because that guy was really right, and that hit me hard. If you can't express a thought, you didn't think it through very clearly in the first place. Language and thought are intimately related. You don't just sort of think out here in Never Never Land. Thinking and language, you think, maybe not in straight everyday English, but a lot of your thinking goes on in something very closely tied to language. And so if you can't express your thoughts in language, you haven't really thought them out clearly. So, if you turn this rule around and say, if you go to the work of expressing it, that is also equivalent to the work of thinking out the details. So a good way to clarify your thinking is to try to get it down on paper. At this point, I will digress to explain a couple of things I'm leaving here for you guys. First is a copy of my book, Art of Computer Game Design. I want to caution you that book was written 6 years ago. It's real old, but there are still some good ideas in there, many of which you've already heard in the last 2 days. There's also a collection of random essays that I wrote. After I finished the book, I still had a lot of things I wanted to say. So I wrote just a whole bunch of essays on topics. Some of them we've already talked about: process intensity versus data intensity, the 4 C's. This is one I haven't talked about. Maybe I'll talk about it a little later today. Similarities with the movies. Hats off to you, Lewis Carroll, Perambulations on the Nature of Creativity. There's a good one. I'm not sure. This one got, Egotism I did in the journal. There's a good one I did. It got published in Computer Gaming World called Games You'll Never See. I'm sure you've got your own list of games like that. My best one is called Airspace Defender. And that one, let's see. This is the action-packed game of aerial combat that puts you in the cockpit of a high-performance Su-17 interceptor locked in a duel to the death with a deadly Boeing 747 loaded with hundreds of unarmed passengers. I'm sure you guys have your own list of these things. I had an E.T. game where you use turbo lasers on E.T.
I'd have bought that. That sounds good.
Anyway, there's some design essays. The reason I bring this up is there is also, right here, a collection of stuff related to one game, double-sided. This is for C-Boot. Now, this is not a proposal. I'm not quite that thorough. The proposal for C-Boot is, let's see, is right here, 16 pages long. And then there's a proposal for another game. When EA didn't like the C-Boot proposal, I proposed another game that had many of the same concepts. Interestingly enough, well, I'll let you read it. The interesting point here is, these are my design notes for C-Boot. This is all the paperwork that I created as I developed C-Boot. You will notice there's a lot of it. These are notes to myself, design essays. I'll talk more about design essays this afternoon. A lot of paperwork. The only point I want to make right now is writing your ideas down really helps you clarify. It's a good exercise. It's really hard to just sit and think. It's just as hard to go for a walk and think. You know, thinking is just so vague. You never really know what you've got. It really helps to sit down in front of the machine and put your words down on paper. Try to come up with something you can hold in your hand and say, yes, this is what I think. Because there's nothing that forces you to be honest with yourself more than actually saying the ideas loud and clear out in the open where other people can shoot at them, so, even if you never show it to anybody else. Let's see. The other thing about a proposal, so a proposal is useful as a clarifying effort. It is also absolutely necessary for the publisher to convince them to buy into it, because you are asking for some sort of fiscal commitment from them, and they're not going to do it just because they think you're a sweet person. It also serves a third function, and that is as an intermediate step. If you imagine a hierarchy, let's start down at the very bottom of ways of representing an idea, a big idea. The very bottom representation of that big idea is machine code. And the next level up is source code. Source code contains the same ideas as machine code, but it is more readable, more human. It's expressed at a higher level than machine code. A lot of the technical details, like the address of this subroutine, are left out of source code because you don't need to worry about that. You're worrying about it at a higher level. And then there's a higher level above source code, Warnier diagrams or flowcharts, some way of expressing how the program looks. Then there's a higher level, the specifications for the program. Basically, the process of software design is a convergent process. We're going to start with the early, vague, oh, why don't you do a, I don't know, Three Stooges game? And you're going to boil that down through layers of specificity until you get down to object code, which people can actually run. The proposal is an intermediate step. It's the specifications. It is the first step in narrowing down something vague like, oh boy, economic toy train set. And it starts getting you into specifics, and then you move down this convergent funnel or whatever. So anyway, that's why you want to write a proposal. I am now done with talking about the creative phase. How about if we break early for lunch, because I'm really ready to plunge into this stuff here. Yeah, any problems with that?
No. Do you guys want to send out for like the deli over here, sandwiches, and be around here, or do you want to all go out on Mom's yesterday?
It's cold out.
That's what I thought. So I thought, like Prima Deli, give them a better order. Send out the
Somebody, well, I'm not sure if we'll need another outline. Let's just see. Here are the existing ones. Well, let's see here. I already chair. So earlier I talked about the creative process, the point of getting up to and through a proposal. Okay, you got the proposal, now what? Well, let's see. I'm going to describe the phases I go through. I'm going to rush through these because you guys have all done projects and you don't need to be told about the basic steps. What I want to concentrate on in these steps is the creative side, how you address creative issues during the development cycle. Let me go through these. We'll see how long it takes me here. In the initial phase of a project, I like to concentrate on doing real mindless stuff. Primarily because the creative wheels have been turning real hard. There's still a lot of uncertainties left in this design. I'm still not sure what this thing is going to look like. And so I very much want to get to work. I can't afford to sit around and think all day. So let's get working, but at the same time, I don't want to interfere with the creative process. So one of my rules is, for the first month or two, concentrate on the necessary mindless stuff. For me, one of those is laying out the initial display. Frequently, every game has sort of a core display, and an awful lot flows from that, so we need to see what it looks like anyway. Let's get that display up. So I will often concentrate on that. In the case of Excalibur, it wasn't mindless work at all. I worked on the end scene, because that needed to be done, and I spent 2 months doing that because I was still working out the design. Now, I don't want to call this mindless work, but I do want to say that intense programming work feels very, very different from intense creative work. You know, there's mental exhaustion, and mental exhaustion comes from too much exertion of a single type. One of my work habits always is to keep many different projects in front of me. And I work on one project, and when I get tired of that type of work, I'll just stop it and instantly move to something else. So during the course of a single day, I'll do mostly programming, but I will take breaks and do some writing for the journal or writing proposals or whatever. Sometimes I'll take breaks and go outside and string some fence or cut some 2x6s or whatever. You do need to oscillate between these various types of work. In my case, in design phases, what I'll do is mix some simple programming with the design work. Debugging is the hardest thing, because debugging, you really need to keep all those details in your head, but you get tired of that very quickly. You can only go 3-4 hours of good debugging, after about the 4th hour, you're not working at your best, you're wasting your time, but gee, I've memorized all of this crap, and if I go away from it, there'll be an hour startup time tomorrow, so I'll keep debugging. That's a bad trap to get into. Anyway, the other thing I like to do in the early stages of a design is write lots and lots of design essays. Let me talk about these. These are very different from the proposal. These are strictly ad hoc things. I'm sitting there one day and I'm thinking about one little detail of the program. I just get up in the morning and I say, you know, how am I going to handle this problem? I know I'm going to have this problem when I do this game. How am I going to tackle it? And I take the time to write a design essay on a problem. Sometimes I don't even know what my orientation is. I just know, gee, there's going to be a general problem here. What's going to be my style, my approach? And so I will sit down and write a design essay. Much of these C-boot notes are design essays. At this point, let me explain this entire thing. I referred to this earlier as design notes. It's design essays that I wrote, little design, some specifications, mostly design essays, little things I scribble to myself. Work list is a common thing. I like to, at least once a week, I like to sit down and write up a new work list of all the things I want to tackle. And then at the end of the week or so, I'll put little check marks beside things I've done and X's beside things I haven't done or whatever. And then I start a new work list the next week, something like that. Anyway, actually the most useful thing in the entire document, there's something funny here, is this, the artificial personality system for C-boot. This document is 36 pages long, and it defines the artificial personality system in semi-English. So if you're curious about how I did the artificial personality, there's a specification in there that I used primarily for my consultant. I needed to explain to her what I was doing without asking her to read the code. So I developed, and also it was a way for me to develop the concept. Anyway, let me also point out, I normally am not this wordy in designing a project. The C-boot project was easily the toughest project I've ever tackled. And I knew it was going to be murder, and so I spent a lot of time making notes, writing design essays, working on it. You'll have to read this in very much the feel of an archaeologist. That is, this is not a complete history of the C-boot project. This is just a random collection of design notes. Now, as designers, you're going to be able to read between the lines and see a lot of what's going on. In many ways, I'm sure you will find some of this amusing if you look through it, as you see Chris randomly jerking back and forth and back and forth. I'm sure there'll be points where you say, boy, I've been there before. C-boot was an exaggerated process because I was so far out in the boonies with this one. I mean, I started off, the basic design concept of the initial game was you're stranded on a planet, you're a galactic businessman, and your spaceship crashes on the planet, on this planet, and you have to walk back to the spaceport. You're taking off from the spaceport and it crashes on takeoff. And you crash land 500 miles away, and there are only two survivors, you and this guy called a C-boot. And the two of you are going to walk back to the spaceport together. Anybody remember a movie, Enemy Mine? Yeah. There's some of that feel in it. And anyway, that was the starting point, the final game. Isn't it all like that? Completely different game. And yet both games, if you look at them from the outermost level, from the topic level, you'll say this is ridiculous. Crawford started off to design this game, and he ended up with something completely different. What I ended up with was something that was absolutely true to the initial concept of the game. That is, throughout this, you must agree, there was a tremendous series of changes that went on in going from walking back to the spaceport together to get mental auras to become the shepherd of Kira. That's quite a change. And yet I will maintain that there was a fundamental constancy throughout the entire project. I knew what I wanted to accomplish, talk to the animals. And I did a lot of jerking around getting that, but I did stay true to that basic concept. So, the one good lesson that arises out of all of this garbage is the notion that you can jerk the topic all over the place if, in an effort to stay true to your fundamental goal. So sort of, if you keep your eyes on the ball, your legs may do crazy things, but you'll still be on the right track. God, that's a bad metaphor. Mixing. Anyway, so write lots of design essays. Maybe not this many. That's there are an awful lot of design essays here. But I do think it's a good idea to, at least once a week, sit down, take stock, tackle one or two of the design problems you're facing, and try to get down on paper for your own purposes what's bothering you and how you think you're going to solve it. Okay, main development phase. I like to get the I/O structures in place fairly quickly so I can see what they're like. And I put in the order execution code. Let's execute whatever the player wants to do. And then the AI comes last. That's fairly standard stuff. I think most people do it that way. I don't need to tell you guys how to program. Let me talk a little bit about algorithm creation. That is useful. Where do you get good algorithms? I can say a few things about that. I like to use geometric algorithms. I have a real penchant for coming up with geometric algorithms, and I think that geometry is a rich field for algorithm creation. Basically, if you just master high school geometry and apply it thoroughly, it can be used very effectively for an awful lot of algorithms, especially, I use it a lot in AI stuff. I'll give you a couple examples, one of which I am proud. Patton versus Rommel. I put some good AI, that's a war game, I put some good AI in there. Best algorithm I came up with on that one was, had a problem. I wanted to see, in Patton versus Rommel, the basic problem is the Germans are with this weak line, and the Americans and British are pounding on the German line, starting to break it up. The German line starts to disintegrate, and the Germans start to retreat. And so you get this very complex situation in which you've got a German line that has big holes torn in it. The Allies are thrusting through the holes. The Germans are falling back, trying to repair their line. And they're also trying to delay the Allies and somehow move back under this tremendous pressure from the Allies. This is generally considered the toughest military problem to solve. Frederick the Great, after he won the Battle of Rossbach, I think somebody came up, it was a brilliant thing he did with a flank maneuver, and it was a brilliant victory, and one of his lieutenants ran up to him as the battle was ending and said, "You will go down in history as one of the great captains of military history." And Frederick the Great was a real dry guy. He just sort of, he turned to the guy and said, "No, I haven't run a retreat yet." Anyway, so retreats are real difficult to do. And I needed to come up with AI for that. And the biggest problem I had was, how does the German unit know? There are going to be Allied units running around in your rear. How do you know how serious that is? So imagine a situation where your Germans are blue, let's say, and you've got units like this. Red is what I'm supposed to use. Military, all military diagrams, red is one side and blue is the other. And here are a bunch of allies. And let's say here's some allies right here. They're starting to go through the hole. And our AI problem is, what are these guys going to do? about this. And how do you even know? It's a pattern recognition problem, you might say. How do you even know that this constitutes a hole in the line? And how deep are these guys? Obviously, if there were green guys back here, these guys should say, get the hell out, we're in deep trouble. On the other hand, if this green guy wasn't there and only this guy were there, it'd be a different situation. You'd want to tell these guys, just pull back a little and move in a smidge, and just pull the line back a bit. So how are you going to recognize all of this? Well, there were a lot of algorithms. The main algorithm I looked at, first thing I did was draw the line. And that in itself is quite a computation. And actually, I did draw the line through enemy penetrations like that. And I said, this is the main line of resistance. And you can imagine an algorithm that searches through. What I did was a combinatorial thing, because there were only about 20 German units. So I said, give me every combination, every permutation of German units in a line, and show me the one that looks best. That was easy. But this problem, the way this was solved, I hope I've drawn these well to illustrate the algorithm. The idea is, I'm evaluating the line for this guy. I take the two line segments that connect to him. I then draw the chord between them, presumably a straight line. I run the perpendicular through the chord. I then run, I think I ran a 45 degree towards the rear, out from this perpendicular. And this cone I declared to be the zone of danger. You find an allied unit back there, you're in trouble. Now, then the only problem was just a standard geometric, take his position and does he fall between these two lines, and it's just solve two simultaneous equations, high school geometry. The real trick I will point out about this is that not a single trig function was used in any of these computations. You do all those slope tricks where to take a line at a 90-degree angle, you just invert the slope. What is it? Invert it and add the intercept, something like that. There's a fairly simple little stunt you do to take a 90-degree twist. And to do the 45, I didn't need exact 45. I think the way I did it was, I found a spot out here, and I drew this line and bisected it, which isn't 45, but it's close enough. And so, again, you add the coordinates together and divide by 2, and bingo, you got the coordinates in the midpoint. So, my point here is that you can use geometry to cook up all sorts of nifty, keen little algorithms, all of which can be done with microprocessor arithmetic. You don't have to screw around with any trig functions. It's all additions, subtractions, multiplications, and divisions are necessary. But I'm working on a 68,000, so I don't care. If you're back to a 6502, those multiplications and divisions hurt. But I was even able to do with Eastern Front. I had a lot of hairy geometric calculations that never used any multiplications and divisions. There's an extension. I'm sure most of you, or probably all of you, are aware of the snazzy little algorithms for drawing straight lines on a reticulated display that doesn't. You don't have to do any divisions to calculate slopes, and instead you just add until you exceed a sum, and then you say, all right, go one more step, and then you add remainder. You know that basic algorithm?
It's based on the slope of the line.
Yeah. Pardon? Yeah, something like that.
That's present.
Well, let me tell you. It turns out that if I discovered that algorithm myself. I invented it my own way. But I came in from a different angle, which actually has utility elsewhere. Do you know how the Mayans did their arithmetic? You know how the Mayan arithmetic? They never conceived of the concept of a fraction. And so their way of expressing, they had a complex calendric system. And they kept track of motions of Mercury and Venus and Mars and all this and the moon. And they really wanted to be able to, they could predict eclipses. They were very, very good. And they never developed fractions or decimal point, anything like that. It's pure integer arithmetic. And for that reason, it's really good to study Mayan arithmetic because that's the same one we're programming with. So anyway, they had the basic add. The way they would express a fraction is they'd say 22 of these occupy 17 of those. So instead of saying 22/17ths, they'd just say whole number is equal to whole number. So in fact, in our terminology where we say 17 over 22, they would say 17 to 22. And they did this for everything. Well, it turns out they knew how to do arithmetic with these ratios. And when you do arithmetic this way, you do that add it 17 times, or add, that add until the remainder exceeds that, and then increment this and start the process over. They had the same technique for doing their calendric computations. So I was able to use that to stumble into that algorithm that was created many, many years ago. The nice thing is, this is a little more extensible because it's more general. You can use it to do division, basically. It is a form of long division in sequence. So there are a variety of computational stunts that you can pull off with this Mayan arithmetic. So anyway, if you're looking around for algorithm creation and you don't have enough cycles to do a proper division, there are ways you can modify this Mayan arithmetic to give you something sort of like a division that's a lot faster. Unless, of course, you already have a 68,000. Let's see. Anyway, my first point then is that you can use a lot of geometric approaches. I wonder if I should... no, I won't get into Eastern Front. I used a lot of very simple geometry for Eastern Front and was able to get some damn good AI in that game, even though the whole thing runs in 16K. Physical analogies is another area rich with possibilities for algorithm creation. That is, I mentioned this morning the gossip algorithm. I said, gee, the interactions between people are sort of like what happens between molecules in a tightly bound crystal. Okay, and then I sort of extended and modified the idea and ended up with that algorithm, that relaxation algorithm for gossip. I'll give you an even simpler and much more useful one. In war games, one of your problems is figuring out, here's a guy, a military unit standing here, and where's he going to go, where's he going to attack or retreat or whatever. And a concept I cooked up many years ago I call the danger field. What you do is, if you're a unit here and you're looking at all these other units, you say every unit emits danger. Every enemy unit emits danger. And every friendly unit emits safety. And so you imagine, all this green danger radiating out onto me from all of these units. And it's a field. In fact, it is not just a scalar field, it's a vector field. That is, this unit is emitting this much danger from this direction, and that guy's emitting danger from that direction. So I'm sitting right here, and I'm feeling some of this danger, and some of that danger, and some of this danger. And then you just do a vector sum of the danger. And you could do it just like a regular, any regular vector field. You could treat it like gravity. Give it a 1 over r squared. Well, you don't want to really use a 1 over r squared because you don't want to calculate squares. So use a 1 over r shift by the number of hexes you are, something like that. There are a variety of stunts you can do, but basically you want something that says, the stronger this unit is, the more danger there is. The closer it is, the more danger there is. And then you come up with these vectors for how much danger, and then you add them together. And you never even need to have the vector in the software. You just have a loop that adds up all the x components and then adds all the y components. And bingo, you now have the total amount of danger exerted on this guy. And then you can have the safety field as well. Here are my friends sitting here radiating safety on me, and this will make me move towards my friends. Actually, the safety field in a war game can be easily misused because it causes people to huddle together, and you don't want that in a military situation. But the danger field is very useful because you can calculate where all the danger is coming from, and then the danger field just tells you what move to make. That is, if you look at this and you calculate all these dangers, you add up all these vectors, they point roughly this way. Gosh, doesn't that look like about the right direction you want to move that guy? Basically, because the basic algorithm of military operations is always the same. It's very, very simple. If you're in trouble, get away from the trouble. And there's all the trouble, so let's go away. That way is away.
Run away, run away.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if the thing is, you actually have to first calculate how important that danger is to you. If you're a big, strong unit, you just take that vector and reverse it. Say, go get 'em, yeah, and charge in. Although I will point out, I once did I first used these heavily in a game I did called Legionnaire. I did use them to a lesser extent in Eastern Front, an earlier game. But I really went hog wild with these concepts in Legionnaire. And there was a bad, bad problem. What I did was the basic algorithm said, well, first calculate how strong you are. And if you're real strong, go towards the danger. And if you're real weak, go away from the danger. And I define strong and weak relative to the danger. So basically, I added up all of your safety and added up all the danger that you felt. And if the safety was greater than the danger, then you attack. And if it was less than the danger, then you run. Makes great sense. Guess how that operates in practice? This was Legionnaire. It's barbarians against Romans, and the AI works for the barbarians. Yeah, you see it coming. The barbarians stand here, and they're all clustered together, and they say, they're the Romans. And they're all looking at each other and say, yeah, let's get them, get those Romans, they're far away, they're not dangerous, let's go! And then they charge. And then this guy is at the head of the pack, and he suddenly looks, and there are all these Romans, and there are just a few barbarians. He goes, ah, run! And he crashes into the guys behind him who can't get forward. And so they're going like this. Yeah! And then this guy, after he rests for a while and regains his strength, he says, I'm strong again, let's go get that Roman. And they just went back and forth and back and forth. So you got to be careful about those oscillations. I screwed around trying to put in damping factors that said, you know, you get so worked up, you know, you just keep going. And that didn't work at all. So I finally just had to figure out a single unified algorithm that didn't have any transitions in it. So anyway, but physical analogies, if you can compare the problem you're working with to some real world system and say, wow, this is just like a glass of wine, you know, whatever, and you happen to know the formula for a glass of wine, then you can just plug it in. So, not the chemical formula. Anyway, let's see. Oh, finally, this is something I mentioned in the journal last time. Soapbox I like to stand up on is arithmetic methods versus Boolean methods. A lot of people trained in WE and CS have an excessively, I believe, an excessive emphasis on Boolean methods of simulation. You can do Boolean stuff, but in general, Boolean stuff is not as good as arithmetic stuff. Normally, the arithmetic stuff will do things for you better than the Boolean. Now, if it is an intrinsically Boolean situation, obviously the Boolean stuff works better, but all too often, the people seem to use a more Boolean style than they need to. Example I like to give is diplomatic, in fact I use this in that article. Does everybody recall the article I wrote? Do I need to go over it? Okay, let me go, I'll go. Let's see. Example, this is from Balance of Power. Let's say we got 3 actors, A, B, and C, and A is the observer, and B is going to do something to C. He's going to perform some act. It's either friendly or unfriendly. How is A going to react to B's action? That is, B does this thing to C. Is A happy or unhappy? Is he pleased or displeased? Well, that depends on 2 factors. 1, is this a nice or nasty action? And 2, does A like or dislike C? And you can express this in Boolean terms. I'll probably get it wrong, but we'll say that A's reaction is equal to B's action, exclusive order, I think, with how A feels about C. In other words, I probably have this wrong if I get the sense inverted. But B's action is either friendly or unfriendly. A's feelings towards C are either friendly or unfriendly, and therefore A's reaction is these things. So if it's friendly or friendly, then A's reaction is friendly. You do something nice to my friend, I like you. If you do something unfriendly to my enemy, I still like you. If you do something friendly to my enemy, I don't like you. If you do something unfriendly to my friend, I don't like you. Okay, so we can express it in Boolean terms. But we can just as easily write the same equation in arithmetic. And instead of, we use plus and minus values. If I like him, this is a positive number. If I don't like him, it's a negative number. If it's a friendly action, it's a positive number. If it's an unfriendly action, it's a negative number. Now, this is the same computation. It's just that this is a 1-bit computation, and this is an 8 or 16-bit computation. So we're getting a lot more resolution. We get to say more interesting things, such as, well, if I don't care really about C, then this value is 0, and I get a 0. That's something you don't get out of Boolean. Or if I like him just a little bit, well, then my reaction will be only slightly positive or negative. So you're just getting more bits of resolution. That's better. That's more realistic. Now, maybe you don't want that realism. Maybe as part of the focus of the game, you want the black and white response. Then use the Boolean. It's just, I get the feeling an awful lot of people just use the Boolean because it's quicker and easier. And it's not our job to do things quick and easy. So, I would strongly urge, when possible, try to use the arithmetic way of doing things. Normally you're going to get a lot more resolution out of it. You're going to get a better representation of the way the world works. The real change is it's a rather different style of thinking. And so it doesn't quite come as naturally or as easily. You have to think through more possibilities. The nice thing about a Boolean thing is you just slap together the truth table. Hey, 4 possibilities. What could be easier? You know. You know, in 3 seconds you do one of those little finger checks where the biggest positive is fast. That must be true. You could do that in a few seconds, and you're sure how it will perform. This thing here has, 64,000 possible outcomes. You can't go through that by hand. So, yeah, it makes you a little more uncertain. Yeah, you gotta worry about it a little bit. You're paid to worry. So, well, to worry about your design. Let's see. Okay. I don't know if any of this is really that appropriate to talk about. You get the game running. Okay, first time it comes up, you get your first opportunity to check the gameplay. And the one thing I would caution here is, it's really tough, but you need to have the flexibility when it first comes up to make big changes. And the difficulty there is an emotional one. You've been sweating on this damn game for 4 or 6 months, and you really haven't had anything working. And then there's that magic day, the very first time when the whole game comes together. I like to compare this to the moment. In fact, I wrote an essay in the C-Boot notes. Compare this to the moment where I can't find it, where the Frankenstein monster first, the eyes open and the hands start to do it, and he stands up and starts walking around. And that is one of the real emotional peaks of any game design process. The first time that game actually runs. Your problem here is that at that moment, because it's such a peak, you are blind. Because, that Frankenstein monster is walking around like this, and you're walking right behind him saying, "Go, go, go, hooray!" And you're immensely pleased with yourself. And the problem you don't realize is that Frankenstein monster could turn around and say, "Master, kill master!" And at that point, you've got to say, "Oops, I made a mistake, back to the drawing board." And it's very, very difficult to do it at that moment. But that's when you have to be very skeptical. You have to take a very jaundiced look at it, even though it's so exciting. Anyway, let's see. A problem that I have encountered many times, I've encountered this with editors much more than with designers, is just telling yourself, well, we'll just polish the problems right away. Sure, it's screwed up. Sure, the Frankenstein monster, his hand is back here and he's not doing anything with it. And you tell yourself, we can fix that later. A lot of those things you can. There are an awful lot of little petty problems. The thing first comes up, little glitches on the screen, and the little right light on your hard disk turns on and stays on. And okay, yeah, obviously we got a few problems here. But, yeah.
Source going away.
Yeah. But you really have to be careful about differentiating the little problems that will polish away from major problems. I have made this mistake many, many times. It is so difficult to recognize a major problem that requires you to go back to the drawing board. And this is one of the real tests of a good designer. A good designer can somehow discern a major problem and say, whoops, this one, we go back. Let's put him back on the table, chop his arm off, and redo it. And there's a lot of reluctance to do that. The problem is, if you don't do it now, it's just going to be that much harder later on. So don't kid yourself there. Okay, alpha code, the only comments I have there is that you've got to have the gameplay right by alpha code. A lot of people try to say that they're going to get the gameplay finished and polished in beta. That's no good. If the gameplay isn't right by the time you're in alpha, you are in serious trouble. Polishing does not make gameplay. Yes, there are little glitzies, just little minor tuning items where we say we just need to speed up this process by about 30% and it'll be fine. Yes, there are always those things. But a lot of gameplay issues are not that simple. A lot of gameplay issues involve things that require much larger changes. And so you've got to get that gameplay right somewhere between the time the game first runs, because before that game really runs, you don't know if the gameplay is right. And by the time alpha comes along, it's too late. So you've got this very murky window. You're never quite sure when the window opens and never quite sure when it closes. But you better address that issue early enough. Sometimes those gameplay things are addressed. I'll tell one more story on gameplay polishing. With Eastern Front. I first got Eastern Front working around early June of 1981. First time it got up and started running. And it was terrible. The game just didn't play well at all. I had the good sense then. Something in me motivated me to put it down. I don't know why. It may have been that Atari dragged me away to CES or something, and I was forced to put it aside for a while. But I didn't succumb to the normal temptation to, quick, let's just jump on top of the problem and polish it to death and it'll go away. Because that I would have failed. The thing that worked for me with Eastern Front was I sat back, I thought about it for a few days, and I realized that the fundamental problem with the gameplay was that the unit density was too high. When you played the game, the early version of Eastern Front, when it first got running, your units couldn't really break through the enemy, and there were a lot of traffic jams, and there was just this clustered up feeling. You just really, it didn't feel right at all. What I was trying, when I first tackled the problem, I was thinking, well, maybe I should make combat more intense so you kill people faster, so you break open holes in the line faster. And then I thought, well, maybe I should make it easier to force them to retreat. When you attack them, it just takes one hit and they retreat. So we have more mobility in the battle. And I looked at a lot of possibilities. And the simplest possibility that I finally came upon later was thin out the unit count. That is, I ended up cutting the number of units nearly in half. Just keep reducing the number of units. Fewer and fewer units means less work for the player to do. Lower unit densities, less crowding, easier to break a hole in the enemy line, easier to maneuver. You know, one of those dumb, simple things. But I couldn't have done that later on. I needed to do that immediately after I first got the game running. Let's see. Oh yes, another danger during the alpha phase, feature frenzy. This is more a problem that will be dumped on you than your problem. Publishers love features. They have this thing about, we want on the back of the box, you know how they have that list of features that are bulleted?
More digitized sounds than any other game.
Right. And they want that list to be as long as possible. And so they come to you and they say, gee, can you stick this in? Can you make it play on a modem? Can you make it talk to a VAX? Can we get it to, not that we intend to sell it to anybody with a VAX, but think what it'll look like on the box to say that you can. I mean, this is the way these people think. They don't care about the direct effect. They just care about the impression. Now,
We don't care if the sounds aren't good, as long as you have more than any other game.
Okay, yeah, literally.
They don't have to help the product or anything. Just make sure there's a lot of them.
Just make sure they can say something truthful about it on the box and not get sued for false advertising.
Actually, just
How many wrestling moves can we say you have? 25? 26?
Yeah.
Yes.
Whatever totally clear.
Do they do that?
Yes.
How many did they say?
Actually,
25.
maybe you could talk into other things like no artificial preservatives.
Walking up and down.
Well, in fact,
Water-free.
Caffeine-free, flavor-free.
Yeah, walking is a move. I remember that.
I do think you would be better off. The danger, the right response to this when they start hitting you up on the free features is to go back and just think, what do we already have in there? And then come back and say something like, 43 separate subroutines, and give them that, so that they can put that on the box. The problem here is they're going to come and pressure you to start sticking this stuff on. I'll give you some examples here where I screwed up. Patton versus Rommel. Have any of you played that? Good. Oh, rats.
Hey, read through the manual and want to play it.
Oh, well, don't. Patton versus Rommel is one of my, well, actually, maybe learn from it, sort of. I'm not going to do that. Patton versus Rommel is one of my worst games. I did not do a good job, and this is an interesting bit of psychology here. EA paid for that product what I thought was a fairly high advance, so I felt really beholden to these people. And so EA would come in with a suggestion, and I really felt duty-bound, honor-bound to comply as much as possible. And I subordinated my judgment to theirs. For the most part, this wasn't too much of a problem because the EA producers generally have pretty good sense. But late in the PVR development cycle, it was about 3/4 of the way in, around 70% through, They came in and started going, yeah, it was just before alpha. They went feature frenzy. They started suggesting all sorts of neat features. And I protested and said, I'd really like to polish the gameplay and get this gameplay right, because it's still not right. It's off. And they said, you can do the gameplay later. Let's get in this feature because I think it's really important. So we added great sounds. Well, great for me. Okay. Then they wanted advisor function. We had this problem. I mentioned it yesterday. The AI took too long. And so, gee, why don't we put up this thing where this advisor comes up and gives you an advisory? And gee, let's put Patton's face up there. And gee, while we're at it, let's rig it so that if you make the mistake once, he looks kind of stern and says, you know, you really ought to do this way. And if you make the same mistake twice, he comes back and he's looking kind of irritated and he's saying, you know, I really expect you to fix this. And if you... What?
On the inside of the EA production of the Chuck Yeager flying game, there's a broken fortune cookie, and the fortune on the fortune cookie says, don't screw the pooch.
But what's worse is during the game, his face comes up and gives you similar messages.
They copied that
is
from
very
me.
fond of that.
Right, that's what when you were saying that, reminded me exactly of it.
I
You see Chuck Yeager's face and it says, you're no friend of mine, or,
yeah.
you know, or don't screw the pooch.
Yeah, that was...
EA really likes that.
Which
Immelman maneuver.
The Immelman maneuver. Don't do the Immelman maneuver.
I was the first one to do that. They actually had not suggested the details. They wanted the advisor and they wanted some graphics to go with it. And I came up with the idea of the guy's face, and then as you screw up worse and worse, his face looks angrier and angrier. And EA thought that was great. They loved it. They were patting me on the back, telling me how wonderful I was, how smart I was, and I bought it, and it was wrong. Because the features look great. They're impressive on the box. They're impressive when the game plays. The problem is the game stinks. And it was just a horrible mistake on my part. We put in a game editor so you can re-edit the game. You can just modify everything there is to modify about the game. Wonderful feature. But the game still stinks. And
How did the graphics screw up the game, or is it that it didn't script the game, is that you didn't have time to devote to
yeah,
the game?
we had a schedule. And I told, one thing I always do, I meet schedule. Come hell or high water. That's delivery date, you're getting it on that date. And so always, you want the feature? Sure, I'll put it in. It'll cost you something else. I don't offer them a cornucopia. I offer them a schedule. They'll get me full time the entire time. And they always get me for a month or two after that. But, you know, I do really insist on it. It is a, and by the way, if you are consistent in that policy, it does work. It has worked for me. If you make a big deal about how earnest you are about meeting schedule, the publisher likes that. And then later on, when you turn around and use it to stab them and say, no, I'm not going to do that for you, they don't have much ground to stand on. So that's a nice little political ploy. Okay. Who else sees your game? This is an important issue because you need comments from people, but giving it too soon or too late can be a mistake. You can show your game to other people too early. The reason why, the way that can screw things up is that if you can poison them. People form impressions rapidly, and if you show them the game while it's still crippled by some serious problem, you know perfectly well it's crippled, and you give it to somebody else and say, what do you think of this game? That crippling will make a deep impression on them, and then for weeks and months thereafter, if you ever give that game to them again and ask them their impressions again, they're never really going to get over that first impression. In other words, you can't go back to a person a second time with a game. Every playtester, every person who's going to comment on your game is only useful once. He can go in, you can get his reactions, his comments, whatever. But once you've used him, you've burned him up for this game. Because his judgment is forever colored by his first impression. Therefore, you've got to be careful. You want to release it initially just to people very close to you, game designers only. People who can look beyond the obvious flaws that any idiot can see and see the game structure there. So you guys have a natural, just this group. In alpha test, you really want to be showing it to each other. But again, you want to dribble it out, do it to one person at a time, so that every week, let's say every week you bring in another person and say, what do you think of this? And then you go through everybody that way. Okay, when you come to beta code, you want to release the game to some outside playtesters. Now you guys, I'm sure, have contractual limitations on this, but I would still strongly urge you to get your own playtesters. Don't ever trust the publisher to do playtesting. Publisher can do bug testing. By all means, rely on them to do that. Don't rely on the publisher to tell you whether the game is any good. The publisher doesn't know. The odds are when you ask the publisher, have you tested it? And they say, oh yeah, sure, we think it's great. What they really did is, the guy took it home that night and he screwed around with it. He let his kids screw around with it. And oh yeah, that was fun, and he brings it back. And he might get real pissed off because something happened that he didn't like, and he's all bent out of shape, and he's yelling and screaming about some piece of trivia. And it's just, it's stupid playtesting. You can't trust these people to do decent playtesting. It is very important that you surround yourself with a good group of playtesters. Now, again, I'm talking home stuff, and in your condition, it's a little harder to throw all of those circuit boards and frames in the back of a pickup truck and drive it out to somebody's house and dump it on his front lawn and say, hey, you want to test our pinball game for us? It doesn't quite work. But, so I will just talk about home stuff, and you guys will have to make the translation to the other types of projects you work on. But in the home environment, I have a group of about a half-a-dozen playtesters with whom I've worked for many years. I'm always bringing new people into this circle, people who look like they might be good. I try them out for a game or two, and if they give me good feedback, I keep them on. If not, I get rid of them. I just don't call them back for the next game. But first, don't get too many playtesters. Don't have this huge formal thing where you put a full-page ad in the paper and say, attention, game players, we want you to playtest our games. First, you get too many people that way. And too many playtesters you can only handle statistically, and that's useless. Second, you get all the wrong kind of people. What you want to do is select them yourself. You want an informal group, people, you just happen to know this guy likes to play games a lot, he's a friend of yours, and he seems like a pretty sharp egg, and he seems to represent the audience you're reaching for. Get that person as a playtester. And when you work with playtesters, it is important that you have a staggered release. What I try to do is I release a version every few weeks, and one copy goes to playtester number 1. 2 weeks later, I give it a version to playtester number 2. Playtester number, maybe I do it every week, it depends. I use each playtester just once. I will always bring in a few naive playtesters, people I've never worked with before, who aren't much on computer game playing. That's important to me personally. I just meet some nice person at a show who says, well, gee, I don't play games very much. Oh, really? And if the person seems, I don't know, cogent, thoughtful, naive, I'll say, well, here, friend, step over. And I talk with this person for a while, and frequently I'll ask for their phone number. I call them up a few months later, hey, would you like to play test my game? I like to see how a naive person who doesn't use computers that much, how that type of person reacts to my game. Okay, you give the game to the playtester. This is a painful and important part. You mail it to them, and you don't talk to them. The worst way to introduce somebody to one of your games is to sit down with them in front of the computer and walk them through the game. No good. That biases them. Because you stand up there and you get all excited and you say, oh, now look at this happen. Oh, yeah. and you're communicating all of this bias. The playtester isn't there to tell you how smart and wonderful you are and how glorious your game is. The playtester is there to find what's wrong with it. Once it's great and glorious, the rest of the world will tell you through the tinkle tinkle of silver. The playtester is there to tell you what's bad. So you don't want to bias them at all. You just very neutral. Just send them, plain brown envelope. It says, here's the game. I'll call you later. Frequently I have a cover letter. Sometimes I will bias them by just telling them things I'm worried about. And just say, do you think, as you play the game, please note whether or not this game moves quickly enough, or whether you understand what's going on, if there are any particular things that I'm worried about. But I try to keep that to just 2 or 3 items at most, because they do bias the player. Ship it out to the person. You wait at least a week, give them a week or 2 to play with it, and then I always take them out to dinner. And over dinner we talk about the game. And then you got to interrogate them very carefully. Your questions can bias them. All questions are leading. There is no way you can really interrogate them with absolute objectivity. So what you have to do is ask a series of questions that are biased in alternate ways. So you don't say, what did you like about the game? You say, what was the best thing about the game? And when they answer that, you then say, what was the worst thing about the game? So you try very hard to get them from both sides. And I don't know, this is part of interviewing technique. Have you ever read about it? Anyway, the idea is that you have to be very careful because your questions will influence them. And you'll end up hearing what you want to hear. And there's no point in going through this exercise for that. Try to select playtesters with good judgment. Don't just grab some jerk off the street. Your early playtesters should be old-hand game players, people who are experienced, who can see beyond the flaws. As you move closer and closer to final product, you want to get more and more naive playtesters. It is very difficult interpreting what they tell you. Frequently, the complaint they make is not what's really wrong with the game. I'm reminded of a scene from the movie about Mozart, where the emperor comes up to the guy right after a play, and after a piece, and he says, it was wonderful, but there were just too many notes. And your playtesters are going to say that to you an awful lot. And the problem is you better not take that seriously. You've got to probe, what is he driving at? What is really bothering the playtester? Very delicate work because you're imposing your theories on the playtester. But you got to do that because you got to get useful information out of them. So I feel that playtesters are a very important part of my development cycle. My playtesters do have a profound influence on the development of my games. Patton vs. Rommel was not playtesting. It was one of the very few games I've ever done that had no outside playtesting. That's because Electronic Arts wanted to retain secrecy, and they didn't want any outsiders playing the game. And the result shows up. Yeah, in the end, they didn't get any outsiders either. After
Still a secret.
Still a secret.
It's still working.
Yeah.
Still secret.
So, use playtesters. Yes, there are confidentiality problems. Yes, that's tricky. Get people you trust. You have to do this. It's a risk. Take the chance. They're worth it. This is too insular an atmosphere. You need that outside point of view. Polish, polish, polish. The ending of the game, or the ending of the design cycle, most of the work is polish. You guys have been through this. I'll just re-emphasize the obvious. You've got to polish the hell out of the game. Just keep on polishing it. But my rule is polish it until you're ready to throw it up. Just, keep going until you're madder and madder, and then ship the damn thing. So that is the game design process. I have gone through all of my material here, and it is only 3 o'clock. We have 2 hours here to talk about issues. In the last 2 days, I have covered a tremendous amount of ground. I'm surprised that I have yet to be really ferociously attacked for some of the things we truly
Try.
Tim, we're so disappointed.
Come on.
I'm sorry, I've got
People have been
real
looking
assholes
forward to
for
this
you.
I do have one significant thing that I'm kind of concerned about that wasn't in here at all.
Okay.
Something which I think is very important, and I think very important, especially in the kinds of games that you do, that you didn't talk about at all, is research.
Oh.
You didn't mention research at all, and you must.
Nice idea.
If you're going to do a game like Balance of Power, you have to know, like for instance, like you said about China, having a revolution in China, or having like Botswana attacking South Africa. You have to know that, and you have to program that in there. And that takes a lot of research.
Okay, let me talk about that. Don't worry too much about research. And the reason I say that is, most of the research that you should do should take place long before you design the game. That is, it should be your general reading and your knowledge of the world, and just everything that you learn. It's sort of just floating around in your head, and then you say, let's design a game. And from all of that knowledge, ideas start to flow. So the most important research you do will come long before you actually work on the game. I really wanted to do a game about Incas. By the way, this is a good topic because the topic does naturally flow us into some good interaction. Manco Capac was the last Inca emperor. He was actually called the Inca. And he was up at Machu Picchu. And the Spaniards had conquered Peru, and he led this guerrilla war against them. And it was a very interesting guerrilla war. It wasn't at all what we imagined, because everybody walked around on foot hundreds of miles across these roads. And so they'd set up a raid way over here, and they'd be back at Machu Picchu before the Spanish even knew it took place. And anyway, so I did it with Galilean relativity. You know what Galilean relativity is? It's relativity without an infinite speed limit. The fact that information still travels very slowly. Anyway, let's see. So,
Lost me.
oh, okay. Well, anyway, it's not really terribly important, which is why not many people have heard of it. Galileo anticipated some of Einstein's thinking. Only he wasn't worried about the fact that the speed of light was finite. He was worried about information transfer at lower speeds. Anyway, the experiment with the 2 lanterns on the hills about 5 miles apart, they're trying to open them and close them real fast as the speed of light was. Anyway, it was real fast. Anyway, where was I? Machu Incas. So anyway, I had read all these books and I thought, wow, this would be really neat. The important thing is, the research all took place long before I actually tried to do a design. Same thing with Balance of Power. I had read a lot about geopolitics. The reason I was interested in geopolitics, I read all this stuff, and because I was interested, I read it, and because I was interested, I thought, gee, I'll do a game about it. Now, it's true, once you are beginning a game design project, yes, it's a damn good idea to do more research. And it's a wonderful excuse, because you get to go into a bookstore and just, give me this, and this, and this, and this, and it's all tax deductible. And that's really nice. But I never saw that as a major phase. For Patton versus Rommel, I bought 1 book. The United States Army, Official Military History, the Normandy Campaign. Whoomp! 1 book was all you needed for that game. Balance of Power, I bought about 30 books. And I did do a lot of research. It really shows in the game, all those numbers in the game.
You didn't make this up.
No! Not
Wait, I 62 by 62 grid where he's like trying to make relationships between all the countries and all these attributes. And he said you couldn't find some figures on some countries, so you just like made them up.
Yeah, yes, I did make up some.
I know.
On trade.
Botswana really does not have an illegal trade in Boolean answers.
He made great insurgency names.
Oh, yeah, that was
Insurgency
the other
names for
thing.
every country.
If you ever look up the insurgency in Australia in that game, I think it's called the Koala Liberation Front. So, anyway, the nice thing is you can fill in nice things when you do have gaps. But not that many games really need a lot of research. With Seaboot, I did read about linguistics, and I got some books on psychometric modeling and stuff like that. That was a little easier. I had a consultant to help me. She selected some nice introductory books on the subject. Some of the other games, Eastern Front, I already had a million books on the Eastern Front. I didn't need any more. So what I'll say is most of the research should take place before you do the game.